Our next session, saving and credit necessary condition for cash crops, the soybean. Tom Shaw, Senior Technical Advisor of Microfinance from the Catholic Relief Service.
I have to make two disclaimers here before I start. First is I wasn't the person who was supposed to speak here. Pete had asked Sean Ferris, my boss, to speak. And the other was I wasn't even involved in this project at all until they asked me to speak. So I had to learn quite a bit, which isn't to say that I haven't been involved in the savings and credit, because I'm really managing a lot of that process at Catholic Relief Services. But the results from this are still slim at this stage. So what I'm going to do is focus on the process we do at CRS and bring you into where we are at this stage in northern Ghana. I happen to know this area really well, but having nothing to do with this project, with other things I'm doing up in northern Ghana. So just to set this, Catholic Relief Services, if you don't know, is an international development and relief agency. About a third of what we do is actual relief, and 2/3 is development. Very few people know that we do actually a lot of agriculture programming and development. People think of other things that we do. Because we work through partners, we exclusively work for partners. CRS doesn't implement programming directly anywhere in the world, except a few exceptional things like Afghanistan and what we're doing in Syria, other things where there isn't a partner. So we work through partners. Our main partner is the Catholic Church. It's different development agencies, whether it's Caritas National Organization or Diocesan Structures. That's about 60% of our partners, and 40% are everybody else. So we partner with lots of other major NGOs, international NGOs. We partner with TechnoServe in some cases. I believe we have 2 or 3 initiatives going on right now. Opportunity International we're starting to work with. We've been working around all of this with partnerships. So as I set the framework, know that everything we do is a framework within the capacity building of our partners. I want to make sure, okay, this is working. So CRS, we take a very holistic approach to development, and particularly for agriculture development. So we've thought a lot and hard about this holistic pathway, and I will show you a graphic representation, where we're taking people from recover to build to grow. So a lot of this is inspired by the work that USAID developed around their pathway to prosperity, but we've added in and tweaked the way we look at it. So it's really this holistic process that we're taking people with a package, and the package changes as they evolve and grow, okay? So if we look at this, what we're seeing is we're trying to balance 2 things. We're trying to balance the market push that we traditionally use as international development agencies with the market pull, which is the private sector. So trying to bring the 2 pieces to bear, knowing that in most cases, you're only going to have the real pull near the top of the spectrum, and at the bottom, you're going to have to do a lot more push. Any of you work with the idea of the ultra-poor, which are probably not the smallholders that most of you have been working with, you know that you really have to support. There's a lot more effort on that development issue, but they can interlink and engage in markets. So if you look at this, as we look at the recover stage, we're really focused on asset protection, on recovery to prepare them for skills development. So it's really saying you will engage with the market. You may have some slight engagement in the sense of how you get your inputs or how you do some of your sales, but it's really preparing them for skills development. Then when we look here and we're moving up into the build stage, we're really looking at the resilience phase. We're really designing for resilience. And this goes all along with what the credit aspect and the saving aspect is. So we're building here with the focus on skills for development for the farmers to engage in markets. It's really building the skill set. And then as we're getting higher, and this is really generally where CRS in the past has left people, we brought them to the stage where they can engage in market, but there's really no market engaging with them. And that's been a real problem. So CRS, something that I'm not going to talk about, I'll just mention, we've decided to move into the impact investment space. We're just cautiously going in because we want to make sure that all the people who have moved up actually have opportunities. And we believe that there is more out there to be done than we or anyone else is doing right at this time. So if you look at this, what we're trying to do is really increase the market performance, and increase household resilience at the same time. And moving with this, knowing that at times, people are going to fall back down. Okay? So one of the things we're trying to bring in here is bringing in the whole idea of microinsurance. So recovery, perhaps not whole recovery, because you can't insure 100% of a loss. You couldn't afford to pay for it. But insuring a 70% or a 80% coverage of loss. So we're looking at different means that we can pull together into that. So when we're looking at this, building this skill set, back in 2009, we did a survey, and I do not remember whether it was 9 countries or 7 countries. I don't know if Ian actually knows the number of countries we went to. And we came up with this concept that initially we were calling the 5 skills for rural development, but that we've rebranded recently as the SMART skills, which is skills for marketing and rural transformation. There's too many smarts out there now. And the idea is it's not just 5 skills, because as we've gone in, we've discovered more pieces that need to be added in. And so we've noted that you need to have group management skills to really engage in agriculture. You cannot just do it on your own. If you do it on your own, you don't get anywhere. You don't get a good price. You don't pay a good price for the input. Like anything else you're producing, you're really affected by all the market forces. You have no influence whatsoever to mitigate the costs or to mitigate the income that you have. So really bringing in the group management. And this is where the savings groups becomes the ideal platform. Savings groups, we call our savings groups savings internal lending communities. But it's the same methodology that CARE uses that they call village savings and loan associations, the Worth model for PACT, Saving for Change for Oxfam, and others who have come up with other names. The idea is really that it's important that they get together, and then we're looking at building a higher level on this of the producer group. So educated and well-informed, skilled people at the small group level also interacting at a higher level. And I'll go into that a little more when I finish the skills. So then the next skill you really need are financial skills. You need to know about savings and credit. You need to know about investment. Again, the savings groups is the ideal platform. And I want to tell a lot of people think we do the savings group for savings groups. It's really the platform that's important. It provides the cohesion in the communities that allows for the other things to occur. And we're starting with the groups, we learned a lot. We've done a randomized controlled trial on the methodology, which I'll go into in a little bit. We note that people do better with what they have, but they don't leverage. So what we've brought in is a curriculum around financial education designed into 3 pieces. So basics, which is around savings, borrowing, budgeting, just the basics. And then savings, moving from I'm going to save to do something because I want to do something, to commitment savings where I know exactly what I want to do and I'm committing to saving to achieve that goal. And borrowing in the sense of evaluating what I need, but beyond what I need is what are the terms and conditions I'm going to get. In the microfinance market, we've delivered more microcredit than we have micro savings over the 40 years that I've been in this industry. And much of that is because we just simply offer something and people will take what they can get because there's no other offer. The challenge is the village user, and I don't know how many countries we've worked in, but users generally charge 100%. South Africa, it was 300%, and often over 3 months, just exorbitant rates, but that's all you have. And if you have to do something, you have no choice. So we've brought in more coherence into the market through using the Savings Group platform. Savings Group platform is still very expensive, but it's very small amounts of money. People generally start borrowing $3 to $5 equivalent, might go to $15 after 3 or 4 years, might be $65. It doesn't get much beyond that because when it functions, everybody wants to borrow. Everybody wants to put in. So it's still teaching people to manage well what they have. We need the financial education to manage beyond well, to be anything from leveraging, to be focused on how we're doing it. In addition, you need marketing and business skills. So we'd look at this at 2 approaches. We have the basic marketing skills and then the higher level order skills that we call the 7 steps to marketing, and our business planner, which is a computer-based program for managing that, so that we go from how do we manage well as an individual in our household and in our production to how do we manage as communities around the whole thing. Then the next step in that is natural resource management skills, because no matter what you do, if you don't manage your environment, It doesn't matter how good your group is. It doesn't matter how good you are as a farmer. If the environment is going to the wrong direction, you're not going to produce much of anything. And so that's a real challenge. It's also something that is less understood because people simply say, well, I use my land. But if the land gets worse and worse and there's less and less of it to go around or less rotation, we really have to manage well what we have. And then finally, we need people to have innovation skills. Unfortunately, often when we say innovation skills, people say, well, what are you going to give them? What technology are you going to give them? The skills is not about technology. It's about thinking through what you're doing, the processes, and innovating around what you've learned on your field. So if your field production is such, one of the things I looked at in Ghana, in an area similar to where they're doing this, is I saw people growing groundnuts in soil that was full of rocks, small stones all over the place. And I'm saying, how do you produce anything? What kind of peanut do you get? What kind of groundnut do you get out of that? Yet when we sort of brought this all together and brought knowledge to them, they moved to other soil types. They realized that they had just been doing it because that's their land and there was no other choice, to they have a choice of selecting the right land for the right crops by bringing knowledge, not by anything else, by bringing knowledge. So that's what innovation is about. So when we focus on the savings group model in and of itself, what is it? It's community-based savings groups. It's self-selecting. People get together, 15, 30 people initially, sometimes a little smaller, sometimes a little larger, it depends. And they decide to work together. We call it savings, but in essence it's investment because you cannot pull out your money. You can't withdraw at any point in time. You can get it at the end of the cycle. It's a share out, it's investment. It's just easier to explain people as savings, and we don't put it on the balance sheet in the right place. We put it in the balance sheet as equity. So we sort of do things and talk about it not quite the way it is. But it's really around this selection, self-selection. It is a safe place to save and borrow. In our randomized controlled trial that we did in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, what we found very clearly is that about 75% of the people could not go to a microcredit institution. So we really were getting poorer people, not necessarily the poorest. But even of those 25 that could, they preferred this because it was safer to them. They didn't have to go somewhere. They felt comfortable with this. Not just the dividend, but they felt very, very safe and secure that their money was being well managed. And they weren't always sure what was happening if it were in a local microfinance institution. Not to say we shouldn't promote microfinance institutions, because that's all part and parcel of what we do, but a lot of it is around trust, and sometimes you have to build the trust of the basics. So they also have what we call a social fund for emergencies. Some people call it quasi-insurance. It's not. But it's used to address certain needs in the community, sometimes a gift so that you can go to the doctors, that you can do things. But it's still a way of bringing together people around the whole process. So that's really what it is, what we brand. How does it work? As I said, it's 15 to 30 people. It can be a little more, a little less, depends on what works for communities. It's savings is the only loan source of loan capital. There is nothing in there. We do not invest a single cent into the communities. It's all around the training model. Okay? It's ownership because they start, it's theirs. If it doesn't work, if they don't own it, it doesn't work. It doesn't finish. And there are very few groups who don't finish, so we can see that the trust builds very quickly. It's managed by an elected committee. You have usually a president, a secretary, a treasurer, and you have 3 key keepers. I'm going to move back and forth here. I want to show you this. It's a box. This is actually one of the boxes in the actual soybean project. And there usually are 3 locks on the box. So you have a treasurer who keeps the box, and you have 3 key keepers who keep the locks. So it's very transparent. And when I ask some ladies, why would you put the locks on it? They just sort of laugh at me. And, boy, were you stupid? You don't know why we put locks on it? You told us this, but we understand this. I said, oh, no, I just don't understand. I don't get this. And they said, look, if the 4 of those people get together somewhere, we see them. Nobody can steal our money because we'll know what's happening. Very clear that. And now, in the process, most of the people who start in savings groups are women, although northern Ghana, both upper east, upper west, and northern region, actually are sort of an anomaly in that we generally see men coming in 25 to 30% from the beginning. I'll tell you what the thing is here because soybeans are a little bit different as to who the farmers are. But it's really important that they all recognize the need for this. It's self-regulation. They set all the rules. My personal way of teaching, although not everybody does it this way, is I say if you can't get the rules on one piece of paper on the 4 sides, you have too many rules. You can have more rules later, but you need to have simple rules. Okay? The cycle is time-bound, usually 1 year. It can be a little bit less, a little bit more, depending on when they want to decide to share out. And the frequency of meetings is weekly. And that's really important. It's a mathematical thing. You have 52 weeks. If you miss 3, 4, 5 of them, you still have 48 weeks. You learn a lot. You repeat, you repeat. You meet monthly. You miss 2, you've had 10 times. What do you get? Not much. So what's really important in that? So let me get on, because I could talk forever about the methodology and what's going on, as to where we are actually in the project. So within the Soybean Innovations Lab project, the idea of our piece in this is increased household income through increased access to savings, credit, and the social fund, what these savings groups offered. So using our CRS approach, and we use a fee-for-service model where the agent is paid by the group. And we've done a randomized control trial. I can share that later. Groups that are supported by a fee-for-service agent outperform paid agent models on every financial indicator. The only thing they don't outperform on is the number of groups served, because when you're a paid agent, you're told how many groups you have to serve, and if you don't reach the number of groups, they get rid of you. When you're a fee-for-service, you decide how much you want to work. So in Kenya, we have people working with 40 groups at a time, which is unheard of, using apprentices, and others working with only 3 groups at a time. Choice. They're continuing to do it, but there's choice. Average income is between $100 and $150 a month for these people, being paid for by the groups. So we selected 3, or the project is in 3 districts in Ghana's northern region, Soboba, Chereponi, and Tolong. We've only done the savings group in Soboba. I don't know if that's exactly, I didn't exactly understand why it's only there for right now. We completed, as of August 31st, the latest data we have. All of the target communities have been sensitized on the methodology. There seems to be a really strong commitment from the facilitator on this. They've been trained on the concepts and practices, and there's been a huge level of community mobilization. While we formed 5 groups, the objective was form 3. Demand is well beyond that right now. There are lots of people who are saying, why aren't we doing more groups? There are 120 people in the 5 groups. 38% of those are women and 62% are men, which is actually the opposite of the norm in that region. So I think it has a lot to do with who is producing soybean, but they are self-selected into this. Savings mobilization has just begun, so they haven't started lending at all for anything yet, but we were out of sync with the cycles in northern Ghana. Normally you want to start savings in September, October, and then you have money and share out in time for the growing season when you're getting ready in April, May to do something. So you're able to borrow at that time and able to do things. So that's generally a better way to do it. And as I said, the demand, from what I'm told, is much higher than what we're allowed at this point in time to do. Looking at what the expectations are based on our other experience in Ghana, it's a lot about information channeling, and that Silk members will understand the value of soybeans and be willing to invest in its production. We found in Upper West, simply giving them information about different crops increased production by 30% in 1 year. That's self-reported, so we don't have data on what it is, but we believe it's true because people know what they did last year and what they did this. We believe, as we've seen everywhere else, that people will use the savings group's loans to purchase inputs, seed and fertilizer, generally in advance of the season. The problem with the methodology is everybody wants to borrow at the same time. There's no money for everybody. The methodology works because you take turns, but you can buy seed and fertilizer in advance. And we're seeing a lot of that happening in other parts of northern Ghana. We expect it to be the same case here. We're going to see more people wanting to grow soybeans because they know they have access to the resources. And with the lump sum at share out, we're actually going to see greater investment in the agriculture production, particularly investment in labor when they need it in order to expand production. I think that's really important because they do that with share out, not so much with the loans. And so we see the local production actually increasing and increasing incomes. And as I mentioned in my comment before, I think bringing in the whole idea of producing tofu for some of the ladies might be a really good income-generating activity, because the area in terms of geographic rainfall and everything is very similar to the area in northern Benin that I'm working with on a completely different project. But we think that there could be a really good exchange. So we could be looking at the feed, yes, for it, but we could also be looking for internal use of the food source and incorporating nutrition in here as an important output of this, provided that we have the opportunity to. So that's where I am.
Thank you, Tom. We can take some question from the floor.
Yeah, Tom, I'll ask the first one. On the question that was asked earlier about expansion or substitution, what do you think is your, it's very early. Are people going to expand? Are they going to substitute something else and not do something else? Maybe your experience in Tanzania or other places where you've done this. Any thoughts on that question?
What we've seen, and I can't say for here because it hasn't happened yet, is that it starts out as substitution. Okay, it starts out as seeing the possibility of a slightly better income stream growing on the same land I would have grown something else. That's typically what we've been seeing with the investment and savings groups, is to start with substitution. But while we don't follow them, I actually have the pleasure of often meeting with groups that have been in their 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th cycle, because I do other things with them. And I think we're seeing a real change there, where we see actually an extension of the land that would be under cultivation. Most people have more land than they can farm because they simply don't have the means to farm it. So I think it would be, but I think we need to have a mix of not just soybean for sale, but I think if we bring in soybean for some of the consumption purposes, I think that's where we'll see more increase as opposed to substitution. As long as it's just sale for turning into some kind of feed and I'm not really using it, it's going to probably be more along the substitution line and little along extension. If we bring in it as a food source, and one of the sisters that the clinics I work with actually made for me soy, looked like scrambled eggs. It was excellent. I had never eaten it before, and I didn't even know what it was when she served it. So I didn't even know it was soy until she told me. It was just marvelous. And unfortunately, when we visit up there, you can't go without eating. It's just not polite. And so she's been very innovative, and I think if we could bring more of this into the Ghana as to what can you do with it, what is the food, because it doesn't have a lot of flavor, but you can spice it and do all kinds of things with it. You can change the consistency, how it is. I think then we'd be looking at expansion as opposed to simply substitution, because people are going to want to do it for the market and for themselves. There is no guarantee, but my knowledge of the people up there is if it works, they'll do it.
So one of the challenges of this credit in West Africa has been managing credit. I remember we are implementing a project for CEDA, the Canadians, and they especially told us, don't get involved with credit issues with our funds. And they are stressing that. When we asked, they said they had always failed with that particular component of projects. In West Africa, there's this tendency of people taking loans, smallholder farmers are using the funds for other purposes, not reinvesting in production, because they have several other uses for money, and when they are cash strapped, they can take money from credit unions or colleagues and they do other things. What is the experience in Northern Ghana? Are they actually investing the funds in soybean production, or are they using the funds for other purposes? What's the success rate of reinvestment of loans in soybean production?
Just be careful that this is different than a microcredit project. This is where it's all internal to the group, and that they are lending each other for many activities. In this area, we don't have data yet, but in Upper West, where we've done this, we found that 80% of the people use some of the money that they get either as loans or share out for agriculture investment, primarily improve seed, fertilizer, and labor. But there are other things, transformation of products. So we are seeing all of that happening. Nigeria is a whole different case for microcredit. I've been in this field for 40 years. I spent 29 years in Africa. I know northern Nigeria, not southern Nigeria. I know all of the Francophone countries really well. And Nigeria is a very specific case. So if you're looking at just giving farmers loans, I say, no, don't do that. But if you're looking at building this savings and internal capacity first, then building financial education and business and marketing skills, and then having people look and say, what do I need to move? A good investment in agriculture in most West Africa, some places more intensive, is about $250. You're never going to get a loan for $250 from a savings group unless no one else in the savings group gets anything, and that isn't how it works. But I don't see it as much a challenge. You know, I actually been in this business a long time. It's really about who owns it, who owns the money, who owns the structure, who owns what's doing. When the government owns the money, or everybody believes the government owns the money, why would you pay? You know, why would I pay? I would pay because I want to have a future. You know, the whole idea that if I pay next, I get bigger the next time. There's no end game to it as far as development goes, provided I have the skills to leverage. And the challenge in Nigeria, particularly in northern Nigeria, the savings groups are actually working really well. Our challenge has been working with them because of Boko Haram being an issue around access to communities. But the savings groups have done very well in every single country in the world that they've been introduced into, as opposed to simply the credit model of going to an institution and getting a model, whether you're in small groups like Grameen Foundation, the 555, or larger groups, or individual lending. The risk is different. We find that people learn a lot more from the savings group. I mean, they really learn well what they need, and we're seeing a change in the ask. Most people would say, I'm going to ask for this because it's like bargaining. I'm going to ask an institution for 100. I know they're only going to give me 25, and we'll bargain, and maybe I'll get 26. We're seeing in the savings group, people are being very realistic and saying, I need 25, and they're getting 25. So that there isn't a whole idea of I'm going to be cheated or I have to cheat the system, is this works, and this is ours. The average return on the investment for savings groups is 29% on the amount you have at the end of the cycle. So you've been putting it in every week. If we compounded it, we can't, because we don't know exactly how people did that. We only have quarterly data, and it's only global data. But we're seeing an average payout of 29%. But people are only saving about $10 or $11, at least in the first cycles. And so 29% on that is still a huge thing. If you're getting $2.90 on $10, you're getting $12.90 or $13. It's a big deal for people. It's also much more flexible than the simple credit model, because the day you don't have savings, you may be embarrassed, but you just don't give it that week. You know, it's just the next week you try to make it up. On average, people increase by 100% the amount they save each cycle. So if they start out with 1, the next cycle it's 2, it's often 4, and if new people join, they join at the higher level. And we're seeing men coming in at the higher level, basically because they've seen the women and the wives getting much better off than they are, and some of the husbands say, I want to be in on this. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We're seeing a whole bunch of interest in that.
So just a comment, then a quick question, then maybe a follow-up question regarding that. The first comment is, I see you did your undergraduate at UW, but you have an Ohio State.
I'm from Toledo.
Oh, you're from Toledo. Okay, that's fine then.
I also did my graduate work at Ohio State.
Yeah, I know, I saw that. But you had the allegiance to the undergraduate group.
I figured with the University of Illinois, I better come in my colors. I'm going to the game on Saturday.
Yeah. So the question I have then is regarding do they have to use the monies they get from this for soybeans, or can they use it for any growing anything?
They can use it for anything.
They can, okay.
The beauty of the model is they will use it for anything, but if you give them the information and the skills to select a higher value investment, they will make the higher value investment. So people naturally do some of their money into agriculture because everybody is agriculture. By giving them, where we've introduced financial education in Upper West, we're seeing a much higher percentage of the money actually going into production, but picking the right seed, getting the right fertilizer, having the right spacing, and having someone from the service who comes in and says to them, you're doing well. In the past, the Ghana Extension Service said to me, well, normally we went to the 10 richest farmers, and those are the guys we met. And we always wanted to help the people like my mother, but how do we do it? The savings group actually gave a voice and a platform for that. And people have been so satisfied because they didn't realize there's that much money. When you pool 25 cents a week with 25 people, it actually adds up to a whole lot of money. And at some point in time, you can do a whole lot of things. We're seeing a lot of dynamics around this that we didn't intend, but are affecting how the community views these members as having access to means, not on the subject, but in some of the countries, in all of these countries, when you don't pay your school fees on time, you kick your kids out for 2 months. You lose 2 months of school, you lose a year. People in savings groups, the school headmaster knows they're in the savings group and they're simply waiting for their turn. They don't kick the kids out of school. They do get the money, they get paid. And so this whole idea of a platform which allows a whole lot of pieces together, but people will make the best decision on what they need the most. So if it's education they need the most, they'll do that. If it's fixing the house, it'll be that. If it's agriculture, if we provide the information that shows that soybean or another crop actually can have a huge impact on their income, they will invest in it. Not because we say it's good, because they're going to make the calculation in their heads that they can do something. Because we've given them a platform and a forum to discuss. They don't accept things simply because you come in the community. Go into savings groups and you say, would you like to do this? And they'll say, well, what would I do with this? I mean, they will take you apart and they will analyze what you're coming in before they'll accept it once they've been together for a few years. And that's really important because then they're making the decisions based on their opportunity costs and their business capacity. We just have to stimulate the environment and provide information. I can see it, like I said, in northern Benin, that was unheard of, but these women there is tofu everywhere up there. And it's a huge money-making process. So they're investing in that. To me, that's still an agricultural product. It's a transformation of product. I know they're not growing it themselves. Someone else is growing it. They're buying it either as meal or they're grinding it themselves, whatever they're doing. And so they can invest in everything, and they will invest in everything. They'll invest what they need, but it's going to depend on whether it's the loan. It's going to depend whether it's the share out and the dividend. So the share out and dividend may or may not go into agriculture, may go into some big ticket item that they've been just waiting to look at and do. But we're seeing that when we bring the information and when they see that they can gain from this, that a lot of the groups are investing money into it. Not all of the money, but money into it. They still have other activities. On average, a poor household in sub-Saharan Africa has about 11 activities going on, of which I doubt more than 3 are profitable, but they still do all of them. We try to bring this all together so eventually they can leverage and make decisions on which are profitable, continue to invest in that and grow, and either put aside or let someone else do those that are less profitable so that they can become profitable. Because if 20 people are selling groundnut paste in the market, there's no real deal. But if yours is a little bit better or a little bit this or you have that, then you can make a lot more on it, produce earlier or later, things like that. So they do whatever is best, but if we provide knowledge that allows them to choose that as one of the better options, we're going to see quite a bit of investment in it.
What percent do go into soybean?
None yet in this group because none of the groups have reached the point of any lending, so we will not know that until the beginning of the next cycle. So when they start growing, when we're in May, June up in the north, and they're actually doing the planting up there and the first rains have fallen, we'll know what has happened. But at this stage, they came in off cycle in terms of agriculture. So in August, they had been saving, but in August, it's too late. You plant back in May. So it's too late to plant something else. Soybeans still wouldn't produce much because the rains didn't go on as long as people would have liked this year. It hasn't been all that great of a season from what I've heard, but it depends on where you are, which is why the interest in microinsurance to sort of mitigate some of this risk to the household, not the risk simply to the loan and institution, but the risk of the household. So that recovery is real, and that if we go back to my slide, you would see the whole idea of that resilience occurring because you have a mechanism to recover at 70% or so that lets you go on for the next year. Farmers here a couple of years ago had a huge drought all across the Midwest, and people lost 90%, in some places 100% of their crops. But because we have crop insurance and we have government programs, those people are still farming today. In much of sub-Saharan Africa, you have 1 year like that, you might go, you have 2 years in a row, which we're getting now, you're off in Nigeria, you're down somewhere else. Cote d'Ivoire was out because of all of the war for a while. You go to these places, and you're doing everything but the agriculture you should be doing.
David from IITA. My question is on the sustainability of these groups. Okay, you support them. For how long do you need to support them
1 year. We don't.
Then they become self-surviving.
What
And then
time?
have you actually gone back, let's say, after a number of years to see if these groups are still alive? You know, why I'm asking the question, when I was still a small boy in the 70s, you know, these kind of ideas were actually pushed in the name of cooperatives. And the intended output from that was, you know, for groups to work together to save and, you know, trade together, you know. But probably as you know, those cooperatives didn't go anywhere, you know. But now what we have done is we've just changed the language. We call them either associations, saving groups, you know. So what is it that we're doing different this time that will make these groups, you know, be sustainable? Thank you.
First off, they are sustainable. The research, where it's been done, and it's very little, is that in a period of 3 years, you have approximately 3% of groups that fail. We estimate that 5% of groups fail, but we don't really know because we don't collect data this time. We're hoping in the future to be able to start collecting data on some of these large projects that we just won, the development food aid programs, where we can actually do GPS coordinates and we can do, with the fee-for-service agent, a way of providing a reward, a fee of some kind to him or her to give us data perhaps semi-annually on groups that are older. I've been with groups that have been in business for 8 years. In Ghana, the Helmsley Foundation, I don't know how many, do people remember the cats in New York that inherited a whole lot of money? That became, the state of New York contested that and it became the Helmsley Foundation. They went to Ghana to look at what we're doing, met with the savings groups and gave us an extra $2 million. They said if you can have things that you haven't been working with for 6 years, they're in their 7th year, you only worked with them 1 year, that are working as good as they are and are right now available to do a lot more of the activities and health that we're going to do, we want to invest in that. Over the board, the savings groups are not like the credit model at all. They're very much like the traditional susu, tontine that you're talking about, but with rules and regulations and the ability to borrow. So it becomes no longer a rotating credit where we all turn around, which are still good things and still go on in the same people in the same communities, but they become an accumulating, but it's more of an investment than savings. We call it savings simply because the word is easier for people to use, but it truly is an investment vehicle. Yes, some will fail. What we discovered is the only real reason for failure is the inability to keep good records. Because when you don't have good records, you have conflict. Conflict's not good. Better to break the group and avoid conflict in a community than to have conflict because you do it. Money doesn't disappear, but it isn't there because people don't remember what happened to it. They don't remember the exact amount that was borrowed or what they did with something. So we estimate that 5% of groups fail. My personal estimate is that most groups grow by 100% over 4 to 5 years, which we don't calculate. So the estimate now is that there are at least 8 million people in Africa in savings groups. I would postulate that it's probably at least double that, and it continues on all on its own. People don't always keep all the same rules. They don't always keep all of the same steps, but if you go in communities, it works. One of the groups I went to has 52 members, which seems unreasonable, and the meeting still only takes an hour. It's like Henry Ford in terms of the invention of the assembly line. They call out, all the steps happen simultaneously. It's a cacophony that I was hard-pressed to understand what was going on. They knew exactly what was going on. There was no question whatsoever who had given what and where and the records and everything. It was all happening at the same time. When we teach it, it's one person finish, one person finish, one person finish. And with that, 25 people is kind of all you can do in an hour. In 1 hour's time, they completely finished that, and they were giving out 11 loans for $65 that day. People wanted more, and that's one of the issues that we want to bring financial education into, is you can't have more until you really understand leverage, until you understand what you're doing, because you simply want more for more's sake, as opposed to being able to show the business, even verbally, of why it makes more sense to have that. And most people can't justify it that way because they haven't gone through a process. People are super smart out in these communities, much smarter than we are, because if we go there and ask the wrong questions, they give us the answers we want. And we can't do that. We'll be challenged. We have to talk up. They don't do that. And then when we go away, they'll say that. I mean, I was a Peace Corps volunteer many people have been, and people will go away, and then they tell you, oh, boy, that guy was stupid. He just, you know. It doesn't matter what color of the skin or whatever it is. They're very intelligent, so what we need to do is leverage, and that's what these savings groups do, is it's 100% theirs from the day they started. They set all the rules. Yes, we help them, but we facilitate, we don't organize, we don't instruct. We really provide that. And this, more than anything else, even 50 years from now, you're going to find these groups functioning. There are Roscas, traditional Roscas in Cameroon, that have $1 million in them. I mean, why wouldn't we see some of these growing to that stage in the capacity and perhaps creating other structures? I am told, although we don't have it, that CARE has had a number of groups in some of the countries who have now gone to the community level and gotten legal status so they could borrow and they could get inputs and they could work with government. That's a really good thing. It's all done on their own. We're knowing about it simply because they tell us, not because we're actually directly intervening with them. So it's a much more sustainable model. It's sustainable in any country in the world. It will work in rural and urban. We tend to work in rural mostly because that trust is easier to build and go forward. But when you go into rural communities where it's actually urban people have sort of gathered and don't have much, it becomes a very effective means. But it's not, it's again, necessary but not sufficient. You have to be able to grow beyond that and get into the actual borrowing, but borrowing as well-informed. And we're seeing quite a bit of this, and again, could go on in different examples that we have, where we're working with youth in our microfinance institutions are actually taking it over themselves, working with youth, building up their capacity until they turn 18 and they become borrowers, but they become really good borrowers. They don't become risky borrowers to start with, they become really good borrowers because they've done the whole savings approach. The institution has known them for 3, 4, 5, 6 years before they've come in. And all that leads to sustainability of the systems in all of these countries as opposed to the simple credit model. Okay? And if that builds the capacity and the understanding, then the credit model is going to work well because it's going to leverage where this doesn't work and it's going to take it beyond that. Investment in agriculture is much more expensive than investment in trade. As I said, you need at least $250 in most cases to do a real investment to scale up your agriculture, and in many cases you're looking at $2,500. You have to build to that capacity, and we believe the savings group is the ideal platform when the skills are brought in as well, not just on its own, that you can build this capacity up in a number of 3, 4 years that people can get into that, but it still won't be everybody. It'll be some people up at the top, some people in the middle, and some people still struggling to go forward because that's the nature of the business we're in.